Hello, friends, and welcome to our Chapter 9 overview. In Chapter 8, we learned how important having a goal can be for us. The act of having a goal keeps us focused, and that alone can remove a lot of room for the tricks of drifting to be used upon us. We also learned that love can be just as dangerous as fear because we lose our sense of caution or just thinking. This love has become a goal, and we haven't considered whether or not it serves our highest good. We just jump right into it. In this video for Chapter 9, we are going to learn why it's important for us to be in control of our minds. We are going to get a better understanding of love, prayer, and the natural laws of the universe. Right away, Hill calls out the devil for his use of straying off into abstract details to confuse most people. I was most people, you guys. When I first read this book, there were so many times that I had to reread the same sentence or paragraph 3 times or 10 times just to understand it. This time, when I'm reading the book, I'm like, oh, I totally get it now. So my goal with these videos is to be explaining everything within these chapters in terms that everyone can understand and start to implement themselves. After being told that this distraction of abstract details will not work, Hill asks why people manifest what they want and then find out they don't want it anymore. The short answer given to us is short and sweet. He says that a life filled with contentment, peace of mind, and happiness will always get rid of what it does not want. So those people who have manifested what they want but are still unhappy are considered to be drifters because they're allowing some part of their lives to be drifting. They're not in complete control. If we think back to the first 2 chapters, we remember learning about all of Hill's temporary defeats. All of those temporary defeats led him to victory, but they never led him to true happiness because he was not fulfilling his soul's calling, which was to sit down and write this book and many more books for us. Now we are going to talk about the positive and negative energies in the world and why they are needed. I really hope you guys enjoy my analogy that I came up with for this. So we have to think of an atom. When we think of an atom, we have the proton, which is the positively charged part. We have the neutron, which is the neutral part of the atom. And then we have the electron, which is the negative part of the atom. All 3 of these parts are required for the atom to exist to form matter of all kinds. The protons and neutrons are located in the center of the atom, and for comparison reasons, we are going to call the protons positive life force energy, and we are going to call the neutrons our free will. Finally, we're going to call the electrons the negative life force energy. Thanks to physics, we know that if we lose or alter one of these 3 substances, the electrons, protons, or neutrons, the entire thing fails to exist or changes completely. Our physical world needs these 3 substances to exist perfectly. It was designed to do so. Going further, we discover that both the proton and the electron, or if you want to reference this, I'm going to use God for the proton, and the electron we're going to call the devil because God represents the positive life force and the devil represents the negative life force. Okay, so they have the exact same powers. They just use them differently. The proton, or God, uses positivity and love. The electron, or the devil, uses fear, lack, greed, etc. That neutron is that area in the center that represents our free will and which path we choose to take. We can either embrace the positives of life or we can allow ourselves to become drifters into the negative aspects of life. It's a huge lesson for all of us to learn how to embrace our fears and shadow sides so that we can be the best version of ourselves and truly become a non-drifter. We cannot experience life without these shadows and negative experiences to learn from. That's why we're here. They're necessary in our lives. They help wake up our souls, and they help us to remember that this mundane life is not how it's supposed to be. So, people are not born into success or failure. They are not born to be good or bad. We can modify anything by focusing our thoughts on the positives and healing through our fears and triggers. Our thoughts literally are capable of creating our reality. We have free will or independent thought, and that is why we can make the universal laws work in our favor. We as human beings have more power than all living things combined. We just need to awaken to our true potential. This brings us to our next conversation of prayer. When people speak about prayer, most people pray when they feel like all hope is lost. This type of prayer only brings more lack to them. It has no faith to back up the words, and it's empty. It has no emotion. They've already lost their hope. We cannot go into prayer with everything around us when everything around us seems to have failed. In this state, we are bringing more fear that our prayers are going unanswered. And this is exactly what we end up with, is unanswered prayers. People who pray in terms of begging have become lost in the drifting habit and tend to blame God for everything wrong in their lives. They've either become too lazy to co-create their own reality, or they just don't know how to co-create their realities. Source wants us to understand and adapt to the positive universal laws so that the beneficial hypnotic rhythm can kick in and help us. So, what is prayer before we talk about how to use it? Prayer is described as faith, which is a state of mind. In this state of mind, people recognize and use the power of positive thought as a medium to contact and draw upon the universe's infinite intelligence. In other words, faith or prayer is a goal backed by a plan, backed by a belief that what we want is already ours. Anyone can clear their mind of the negatives by healing through them and replacing it with faith. The goal of using prayer in our favor is to back up our prayers with a clear, knowing faith of what we want is already ours. If we want $2,000, then first we have to believe that we are worthy of this $2,000, and then we need to take action steps to achieve it. A person who goes into prayer with a definite goal and faith will receive advice from their higher self with the action steps needed to attain or achieve their said goal. We need to realize that one form of praying is negative while the other is positive. Which one we choose to utilize is completely up to us. Whatever one we do choose is evident in the answer we receive because all prayers are answered. None go unanswered, none fail. The answer we receive is completely dependent upon the way we went about praying for whatever it is we're seeking. Definite knowledge organized into definite plans in the minds of people who think for themselves and backed by faith and prayer is the road to success. Let's take a deeper look at love and how it's important to control our minds when we find new love. Earlier in the video, we talked about people achieving success and finding out that they are not happy with it. This same thing can happen when we find new love. Back in chapter 8, we talked about how we lose our rational thoughts and tend to just jump into relationships. Taking it deeper, we should not be settling for any relationship that makes us unhappy, whether work or personal. Minds which do not harmonize should never be forced to stay together. This is the surest way to make people want to start drifting, is staying in unhappy relationships. We don't owe anything anyone, nor is it our job to fix anybody. It is our job to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves. It's our job to find a happy and fulfilled life, and if we can maintain keeping our cups full, then we can begin to help others. When we think about past role models such as Gandhi and Mother Teresa, I believe that they were able to help so many people because they always had their energy cups overflowing. They ate well, they took care of their bodies, they meditated, and, amongst much more things that they did. And so we are taught that self-care is selfish. And this is an old belief that was programmed into the brains of our ancestors and handed down to us. Self-care is actually the opposite. And I'll record a future video on self-care and the old philosophy within the next couple of weeks. But being as this idea was mentioned from Hill's perspective that self-care is selfish, I wanted to point out that this is an old thought pattern and self-care is by far not selfish. So next, we're going to briefly talk about children and let it carry us into our next two topics, which are going to be the church and schools. As parents, grandparents, role models, we have a tendency to spoil the children in our lives because we want them to have a better life than we did. We do things for them instead of explaining how our child can do it for themselves and walking them through all of the steps. When we do this, we are robbing them of their we are robbing them of their ability to seek and gain knowledge firsthand. We should be teaching them everything we know. We should also teach them how too much of a good thing can be used against us with the tricks of drifting. We should be teaching them about the balance of the world and the universal laws that it already has in place for us to use. Remember back to chapter 4 where we talked about the subject of school and role models. And if you need a recap, go back and check out the video for chapter 4 that I did 4 weeks ago. We can see that definite of purpose is not taught in schools. There is no definite of purpose behind the school curriculum. We go to school to distract us and begin the drifting habits. We memorize stuff in school to earn credits, which these credits cannot be exchanged in the real world, but they can be exchanged. Some of them can be taken with us to continue our education by going to college. The entire time we're in school, we are distracted and not learning how to co-create our own lives. There is nothing more important for us to understand than the forces which influence our mind and cause us to think and act the way that we do. So briefly now, let's talk about the churches. And again, you can go back to chapter 4 for a more in-depth understanding of this. Most churches help influence drifting. Very few religions and their leaders allow for people to come in with independent thoughts and questions. How many times have you asked a religious instructor a question only to immediately feel like you were being shunned because you were trying to see outside of the box and think deeper? I know that I have experienced this at least a dozen times. In fact, the reason I dropped out of catechism, or whatever the Lutheran version of it is called, is because the pastor at that time wouldn't sit down with me and explain to me why those kids had to say such mean things about me. He didn't have any answers. He just kept going on and, giving me random answers, which made no sense to me. And he asked me to come back, but I never did. In fact, I didn't step foot in another church for many years after that, until 2014 when I lost my dad. It was about 6 months after losing my dad that I turned back and found my faith again, because I had nobody else to turn to. But prior to that, at that age of 11 or 12, whatever age I was, I lost my faith, and I kept it lost for a long time. So our next topic that we're going to discuss when it comes to the churches is their need to teach us to repent against sin. But what is sin? Sin is anything in which one thinks or does that causes them to be unhappy. Some common sins listed for us are overeating because it causes ill health, overindulging in sex because it leads to drifting and takes away our power, negative thoughts such as greed, fear, self-pity because they, lead to drifting as well. And you can find more examples of this listed on page 182. Fear and ignorance are the most common and destructive types of sin. Drifting through life without aim or purpose is a habit that leads to poverty and destroys self-determination. It deprives us of using our minds to be a medium with infinite intelligence at our fingertips. So now let's talk about how we can change the school systems to give the next generation complete control of their minds. Okay, so to begin with, we need to stop teaching our children to memorize facts and useless information. We need to teach them how to do their own independent thinking like scientists do. The second thing we should teach them is the importance of setting goals and sticking with them. Third, we need to teach them how to organize and make use of the facts that they find and stop cramming their brains with no guidance or information on how to use everything that they learn. Schools were originally created for the families that could afford it, as if the wealth entitled them to an education. It was built from the top down, created through indefiniteness. They claim they didn't know what they were doing when they created the system. I would like to differ and say that they did, because this totally puts people into drifting mode. They put you in school, you're paying money to go to this school, which was originally created for the wealthy. So the higher education eventually turned into mandatory schooling for every child and punishment to the parents who don't get their children education. The mandatory education turned into colleges for an even higher education, and you guessed it, more money out of your pockets. I truly believe that when they created the school system, they created it with the intentions of knowing that people would invest in something that they felt was worth it, and this starts the drifting habit by making us spend our money. And so I highly encourage you all to really read this book and think about the things that are mentioned in it, because they are truly eye-opening if you allow them to be. Next, we're going to take a look at how we can make these changes, and this list can be found on pages 174 through 178. First, we're going to reverse the present role so that the students are leading in the classrooms instead of sitting there being quiet. Second, we want to organize all schoolwork into definite methods so that it relates to problems within the real world, solutions outside of someone else eating your apple, how many are left? Or I bought 2 apples and I had 6, how many total do I have? Like, we need to venture way past that. Third, we need to teach our children how to recognize practical ideas that they may use to help them acquire what they want from life. So, for example, we need to talk to them about the positive forces of hypnotic rhythm. Fourth, we should teach them how to budget and how time is our greatest and cheapest asset. 5, teach children the basic motives of people and how to use these motives to get what they want from life. And it's not that we're teaching our children to use people, but we're teaching our children to recognize patterns so that they can benefit or avoid, so to say, a pattern that's going to enlighten them or bring them down. 6, we want to teach proper eating and sound health to our children. 7, we should teach our children about the difference between energetic entanglements of having sex with someone and how it can be used for enlightenment instead. The difference between love and lust, if you will. 8, we need to teach them to be definite in all things, beginning with their major purpose in life. We always ask our kids what they want to be when they grow up, so let's help them out by showing them how to stick with it, within reason. And obviously, as our kids grow, what they want to be as they grow up changes, so we need to grow and evolve with that and help them grow and evolve with it as well. 9, we should be teaching our children the habits which can be formed through positive or negative energies and giving examples of each. So again, back to the hypnotic rhythm and the natural laws of the universe. 10, we want to teach our children how habits can become fixed through these natural laws of the universe. 11, we want to teach our children the difference between temporary defeat and permanent failure. 12, we want to teach our children to rely on their own judgment and to express their own thoughts fearlessly. That's a huge one because a lot of our children are told to be quiet or told not to say things, and we need to let them open their throat chakras and express their own thoughts. And now I want you guys to go check out the rest of the list because there are at least 20 more things listed that we can do to make this change happen. Got to go read it. And if you read through this massive list, you're going to recognize that everything stated disregards currently what's being taught in our schools. And this is a huge eye-opener. Also, if you read through the list, please let me know which ones, if any, shocked you because of how unusual or drastic they would have to be. The devil says that this shock would be good for everyone because it would disrupt the habits of people and force them in a new direction. This is exactly what we've had happen with 2020. We've had the virus, we've had... I don't even want to get into that, but if you've had your own 2020 and it's been a year for the books, right? And so I've also heard this called or referred to as a spirit bitch slap. A spirit bitch slap is a massive disruption that creates a change that we are either avoiding, we're uncertain of, or we're completely unaware of it. So this little slap kind of helps us back in the direction that we need to go. Some other changes listed are learning how to negotiate without conflict, financial independence achieved through individual goals, and classroom settings replaced with round tables for easier discussion. Instead of a handful or just one teacher, we should have a slew of mentors. Each of these mentors are at the top of their game and teach us how to apply their knowledge in our own lives. We are told that the quickest way to implement these change or create these change would be to induce it into the private schools, Once introduced to the private schools, the public schools would eventually want to adapt the techniques. And we are reminded again that only 2 of 100 people have what it takes to move past temporary defeat. Use independent thought and avoid drifting. Who's ready to level this up? One day I want to see 95 people out of 100 as this statistic. And so this ends our Chapter 9 overview. So let's join me next week where we will learn about self-discipline. Until then, I am sending you all lots of love, lots of light, and many, many blessings. Namaste, friends.